Today, we're going to be doing a lesson with Sam Sachs, lead digital producer here at WRBL, on digital writing or storytelling for digital platforms, including digital, social, and email. So I'm going to share my screen, and then Sam will drive. Okay, Sam, you just unmute, and if you don't mind, why don't you give us a just a brief 30-second life story, Sam, before you begin.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. I'm Sam Sachs. I'm the digital producer here at WRBL. I have a mostly print background, so my writing is a lot. I guess I tend to skew more towards big words, so that's one thing to maybe avoid. But my specialties are research and investigative reporting. I have a lot of experience with doing SEO and traffic-based augmentation for writing in terms of how you structure headlines, narrative, and visual elements to increase web engagement for our digital audiences on both mobile and desktop platforms. That's what I do here. And so basically today's lesson is going to mostly be about how do you kind of get your feet wet and do that for your internships, and how do you take that into your final years in school and into the field with how to write for our constantly changing and shifting digital market.
And before we move into lesson 2, I just want to say something or posit. Sam is very accomplished at what he does. He's super strong. Has helped grow audience here at WRBL.com. What do we do when you started? I guess our audiences are up, what, fivefold or?
In our first year after I don't want to call it taking office, but after I joined WRBL in March of 2019, we grew our audience about 4.5 times what our audience had been the year before, due to increased engagement, different strategies for how we wrote our web stories and how we used them on social media without oversaturating our audience's influx of news in a kind of Facebook-centric and Twitter-centric digital age.
And because of that performance, and he's also just a great teammate and a great guy, Sam is going to be working with you for the first part of your internship, but then Sam will be handing the reins off because Sam has already been promoted and accepted a job at WFLA, our station in Tampa, Florida, and he's going to be a digital data reporter. So Sam will be doing some investigative, long form, and enterprise type work for digital in authoring original content for a top 20 market. And so we're real proud of Sam. We're going to miss him, but you'll notice another face on this call, Tom Ingram, who is a 6 and 11 producer. Tom has a lot of digital and writing background, and Tom is actually right now applying for Sam's job. So Tom is in this mix right now to see what Sam is doing, but also we're a big believer internally here at WRBL and Nexstar of promoting from within. So Tom, in his pitch for the gig and also his evaluation of whether or not he thinks he might want to do the gig, is getting to peek underneath the hood at things like what we're doing today, and to see what Sam does and to say, do I think I have a good match for that, and am I interested in that gig? So those are the two other faces you see on the call besides me and Justin from WHNT. So Sam, thank you, and take it away.
Sure. Okay, we're gonna just go to the first actual slide, I think, to start off. Okay. So generally, this presentation is going to focus on basics, and we're going to take that a little bit further into a Q&A session with you guys, so that if there's anything that pops up that's interesting to you or that you want to get clarification on, we can kind of go through that in a more informal discussion type setting. I don't really like formality. So with that in mind, we're going to go ahead and get through. The biggest thing here with writing is your headline. That's really what's going to bring people in or pull them out of whatever they're working on or reading or listening to, is how you attract them. That's the first thing they see, is an image and a headline. So to keep them engaged there from the start, this is probably the longest set of guidelines you'll see in this whole presentation. Headlines are the trickiest thing to write. You can get an amazing story and you have a terrible headline and you're not going to get any traction. So be accurate. Definitely keep it short. I try to keep headlines around 10 words when I can. Obviously, there are some exceptions, but typically keep it short and keep it straight to the point. You can have fun with language a little bit, but always be direct. Don't use passive anything in your headlines. And keep in mind that headline grammar is a little weird, so you can play with it a little bit. Biggest thing here is to avoid making the headline not actually relevant for your story. So overly vague headlines, they work for some things like pet stories. You can keep them a little bit more vague, but if it's crime related or if it's a really big enterprise piece, just keep it straightforward. Know where to capitalize. That's big just for formatting purposes. The AP Associated Press actually says it's called down styling. You want to write your headlines as if they're a sentence. You just leave the period off at the end. And so that's one thing, probably one of the most common mistakes you'll see from new reporters is how they format their headlines. They are also one thing that everyone has trouble with. I even have trouble writing headlines sometimes, and I've been doing it for almost a decade. So going forward, we're going to circle back to all these things and how they relate to each other in terms of writing your stories, but we're going to keep this list here and we're going to move to the next slide. Before we get into common writing mistakes, are there questions so far on how you guys do your stories? No? Okay. So common mistakes in your writing news, passive voice and verb tense agreement. This is broadcast news. We do use present tense on TV. Web, you will never use present tense outside of a quote. The reason being that your web story has to be relevant more than a day after. So present tense is a mistake. So the way I kind of talk about it with our new reporters and with our previous intern class was you have to write web in the now versus long-term relevance. And so with breaking news, you can kind of have some flexibility, but you really want to make sure you're not talking about just today. So we avoid words like using today or a day of the week. You want to use dates and you want to use specific things that anchor it to a point in time. That way it remains relevant even a week or two after, depending on the story. We had a story that one of our other producers wrote about a Georgia sheriff who was charged with rape and incest, and 2 weeks later it is still getting us 1,000 views a day, basically. That's why we write things in past tense to start off so that it's relevant the next morning, the next week, and sometimes the next month. One of our big time reporter names, Elizabeth White. I'm sure everyone in Auburn, if anyone's from there, at least has heard her name. She writes stories that can be viable for up to a month after sometimes. So we really want to make sure that when we're working on these stories, they are going to work and not really be evergreen necessarily, but that if you click back a year later, be like, look what happened, and here's a follow-up, that it still makes sense. Solutions to these easy mistakes is honestly just being really careful, read carefully, and make sure that your verbs make sense in the past tense. I would say the other big one that I focus on with training purposes is using more than one source. Like human interest pieces, you can have one person you interview for the bulk of it, but having that second source helps you ground the story and make it not just conjecture or opinion or my impressions. It makes it have that factual basis to bring the human element to the forefront and make it understandable for anyone. We're writing for our neighbors, not for a general, or, well, I guess you can, but we don't write for robots, we write for people. So we want to make sure that what you're writing, it feels like something that the person next door could go through and that you can help them with if you write the right story for it. Questions so far? Nope. Okay. So with digital audiences are weird. I'm sure you guys all consume news probably on your phones for the most part. That being said, the way you write, even if all of your writing itself is grammatically, verbally, and factually correct, paragraph size is going to be what kills you. On a phone, especially, about 85% of WRBL's traffic is mobile, whether it's through Facebook, through a news app. We have a pretty cool app ourselves. Whatever you're reading it on, though, paragraph size is going to be what makes or breaks your story success. Because if it's too long, and we have these two examples here on screen, too long means they're going to feel like they're reading an essay and they're going to just get turned off and leave. Paragraph sizes are, I cannot stress enough, even with our experienced reporters and even in my own writing, I tend to be long-winded. So cut down paragraph sizes. We try to average 1 to 2 sentences if they're longer for a paragraph on web. And the reason why is that if you're reading on a desktop, it looks pretty normal. But even the New York Times, you'll see, has like shorter paragraphs to keep people engaged because it's all about the scroll speed and how quickly they're going through. If it feels like it's something they can get through pretty fast, they will read a longer story. It just needs to not feel like it's long. So that's why paragraph size is important. We call them bite-sized basically, and that's what helps keep people engaged for longer amounts of time. And it also encourages them to click, related links on your website or on your app after, because they feel like they didn't get enough. Bias is a really big thing. Has anyone had an experience so far writing something where they get kind of guided to avoid opinion? Yeah. So I call this perceived bias. Even if you don't have an opinion or if you're not inserting it, language is very tricky. Word choice is primarily important here because of how you present objective information. Our job is not to characterize information or to guide the reader to a conclusion. Our job is just to tell them what is happening and what people are saying about it, and they can draw their own conclusion. So especially now when everything is hyper tense with how you write, depending on what outlet you're with or what political party you may or may not be a part of, avoiding this perceived bias is very, very important to succeeding as a reporter, especially for local coverage where the national stage is pretty tense and hyper partisan right now, but like you get down to the local level and it gets actually, in my opinion, much more dramatic because the battle lines are local and you could get along with them for like, yeah, trash pickup needs to be more frequent, or the city council's trying to increase taxes or whatever to fund some school project and you disagree. But then it gets very quickly into a matter of what party are you? Why do you care? And so avoiding that issue when you're writing is probably one of the most important things you'll ever get. And you'll see throughout your entire career in news that it's going to be an issue forever. So always be sure to strike a balance between information and making sure that your own opinions on it don't come out. Now, whether that's being a little bit cheekier in like an op-ed or editorial piece, we don't do that in TV typically. We can have fun with scripts, sometimes like throwing in a pun. One of our evening anchors, Phil Scoggins, loves that when we do it, especially with human interest pieces. But with your web writing, it needs to be just factual, straight to the point, and sanitized, basically detached from any emotional anchors there. It's tricky, especially with community news, but the point is you have to preserve objectivity. And that's how we remain credible with our audiences. Questions so far? No? I'm going to ask every slide, so just get ready for that. Digital audiences are shifting too. Right now, we're actually kind of seeing the old coming back as a new strategy. Newsletters are making a resurgence. You'll see it from a lot of the big subscription-based newspapers like the Washington Post, New York Times. The Atlantic is a good magazine. You've got the Texas Tribune, Tampa Bay Times, all these big papers that are famous. The way that they retained audience when digital revenue died essentially a few years ago, especially during the 2008 economic crisis, was they shifted to subscription models. They made what they were covering, they tried to adjust their strategy to write in a way that was more appealing to a wider audience than their like home base. But also they brought the subscription newsletters back. Some did it more successfully than others, but things like the New York Times Daily Briefing, Politico does it, ProPublica does it. You sign up, you put your email in, you don't have to necessarily pay for it, and you get the top headlines of the day or a big story they're working on. And you can, with like Nexstar companies especially, you can actually choose on the app at least which things you get alerts about. Going forward, our company is doing newsletters. We're exploring ways right now to make that work. And the reason it works for us is it brings more options and opportunities for stories to do well for more than just the first day. Sometimes you have breaking news and a big enterprise story you've been working on for like a month doesn't get any traction because suddenly someone got shot. And that's honestly like 60% of your daily initial burst of traffic is going to be, oh crap, this thing just happened, let's read about it, and you ignore everything else. Newsletters will give you the opportunity to refresh your traffic, get new eyes on stuff, and if people were reading and let's say they got busy or they got into, maybe they fell asleep, I get tired at the end of the day, like newsletters will give them a chance to go back to it. And so emails are now the new gateway to newsletters. You're not getting print getting sent out by mail literally anymore. Obviously, that's just horribly expensive and not effective. But emails, everyone has an email. Everyone has a website that they go to. This is the next kind of step to bring that back and get a larger audience that you wouldn't normally see on a website or on an app even. Everyone who's getting their news through Facebook, they may not want to get, go to wrbl.com to click this, but they'll click on it if it's on Facebook. This gives them another avenue to get to your website. without making it feel like you're roping them in. In terms of just general writing for web, AP style is always going to be the standard, and the SPJ code of ethics is always the expectation for how you write. Avoid ethical issues and follow the style sheet. So in this, there's a PDF that we're going to send out with these slides as well. All the blue spots are obviously hyperlinked. There's an AP style cheat sheet that's pretty relevant and updated relatively frequently. That's going to be your best friend for writing in this internship. And then the AP style Twitter account for when they do updates is going to be something to follow, just so you can see. Like earlier this past year, they changed the format for how do you write black when speaking about African Americans. Now it's capitalized. It used to not be. The way that news broke was the AP tweeted it out first and then wrote about it. So Twitter, I would definitely follow the AP style guidebook, just because any updates they make, especially now when everything is so hyper focused online, is going to be there.
I will email out this PowerPoint to everybody, and I will include the PDFs that Sam is referring to, so you will all have links and the copies of those things.
Yeah. This, I just like Pulitzer. He's, there's a reason there's an award named after him. But for local news especially, this is kind of what's important for me and how I approach whenever I'm writing a story, is to write short and they read it. You write clearly and they'll understand it. You write graphically and they'll keep it in mind. That really goes back to, we're doing local news. We're not typically, you're not going to see me writing a national story unless it has a relevance to us in Columbus or in Auburn. Make sure you keep your audience and your footprint in mind when you're writing anything. And so that's why I kind of picked this quote here.
Great.
Yeah.
Sam, thanks. And we're going to continue with questions now, obviously, but usually I save the recommended reading for the last part, but I'm going to go ahead and give you the recommended reading now, and it is the Associated Press style book. This is the paperback version. It's $20, I think. If you don't own a copy of this, I would recommend getting a copy of this and having it so that you can refer to it as you write. You can also use those cheat sheets. Sam's boiled down those cheat sheets of stuff that are most often come up with new reporters. Is that a fair way to describe that, Sam?
Yes, that could be anything from how you structure a dateline to state abbreviations, really, like little things that you just don't think about until you do it wrong.
There are a certain set of books that, and some of those are the ones I'm recommending to you, that I've purchased over the course of my career, and I continue to go back to and read and reread again. And the Associated Press style book, this is the latest one. They put a new one out every 2 years, and this is the current one. And again, it's $20. They do have the cool wire-bound one, which will lay flat, but they charge $35 for that. So that's up to you if you want to spend the extra money. But I recommend having a copy of this book and just having it on your desk so you can just refer to it. If you have a question like, how do I do that? You flip it open and boom, your answer is right there. So I would recommend, you being, having that and being able to refer to it at ease while you're writing your articles. So any questions for Sam about these slides that he's covered so far? And we want to handle anything. Ryan, go ahead.
Thanks, Gene. And thanks, Sam, for just like showing us everything and really talking to us today. My question for you is, how did you know that it was time to leave? And how did you find a job in the top 20 market, and what kind of propelled you to get there?
At risk of sounding dumb, I didn't know they were a top 20 market when I applied. When I kind of started thinking about moving around, it was a few months ago. Digital is very fast-paced, and I don't get a lot of time to do in-depth reporting anymore. That's what I went to school for. It's what I enjoy reading, writing, and working on. And I've had opportunities to do it at WRBL, but I wanted to shift my career direction to doing it more often. So I started looking at jobs internally with Nexstar and other companies too, but mostly within the company here, because we're the biggest broadcaster in the country, and it's more likely you'll find that perfect fit if you stay in. But I started looking a few months ago, put a couple applications in, then November hit and I had no life for like a month. And then we're in Georgia, so we had a runoff in January, so I had no life for another month. And then a few weeks ago, I get an email from the digital director at Tampa, and they're like, hey, we saw your application. You want to schedule a phone call. And I honestly had almost forgotten I'd applied there. And again, I don't check market rankings for like Nielsen numbers. I usually check digital trends and things like that for how different areas and different stations in our market are doing. So I didn't know how big of a jump it was going to be. I just went because I thought it was a cool position to apply for, doing more in-depth database enterprise reporting. Tampa is a beautiful city. They've got a lot of stuff going on. It caught in my head because our code and inspections director in Columbus had actually moved there a few months ago to be their new city development authority. And his father is the university relations official over here at CSU, which is where I went to school. So I know both of them, and I was just like, oh, Tampa, that sounds familiar. I might know someone there. And then I applied for the job. It just happened that I was very lucky and was accepted for it. So I accepted their offer back.
Well, lucky, but also he makes his own luck. I mean, not to let Sam's head get too inflated, but Sam has also interviewed for some other big jobs, and he including an interview with Frontline, where he got pretty far down the road. Y'all are familiar with that PBS show, which is very demanding, and it's capital J journalism all the way. So Sam's good at what he does, but also to his point, sometimes inside of Nexstar, if you're already in, then you get to find out about or you get put in front of other people in the company, which may be considering hiring for jobs that aren't even posted yet. So they know we have good people in the family, and they start asking around. News directors or digital directors start talking to other people and say, hey, I think we're going to be able to add this job in a budget next year. Do you guys know anybody? And so word gets around and people start talking. And so somebody might get tapped for that gig, and then that opens up, their previous position. So getting inside of a company like Nexstar, one of the other larger outfits, most of them try to promote from within, but I can tell you my experience is with our people in Market 127, Sam's going from us to Tampa. The last MMJ that left us went from us to Charlotte. So people coming out of this newsroom make really big jumps. Is that fair, Sam?
Yeah, that's definitely fair. I think Grace is next.
Grace. Yeah, Grace.
Grace, go ahead.
Hi. First of all, thank you for being here. This is awesome. I read your bio that Mr. Kirkconnell sent out, and I saw that you're a photographer, same. And then I saw that you like to build models, and I'm kind of stepping into Warhammer. So I was like, that's really cool. So kind of my question is, so how do you find a good balance? Say you're given a story and there's so much information that you could throw out, but like you're also trying to keep things bite-sized and not super long and to feel super fluffed. How do you find a good balance when there's so much information, but you're still having to make it feel like this is still flowing well? This isn't so packed with stuff that my attention is just going to be like gone because of an overload of information.
Right. So actually a recent story I did get to cover investigatively. Phoenix City is one of the areas in our market. It's right across the river from Columbus, across the Chattahoochee.
Okay.
Their police department just settled a $250,000 police brutality case for excessive force a few months ago. The way we got that information, one of our previous reporters who's now at WTN in Albany, New York, she had reported originally on when the body cam footage or dash cam footage from the car, basically there was a car chase. Police officers thought a guy was doing a DUI, pulled him over into a bar parking lot, and then within about 15 seconds of getting into the parking lot, just started beating the crap out of him. Guns drawn and everything, 3 cops.
Yeah.
That case just settled for $225,000. And so the city wasn't going to talk about it, but the settlement approval and the price tag were disclosed in a publicly streamed council meeting, which is how we got kind of onto it. We'd covered initially when the camera footage was released, and that was over a year ago. And so we'd done some stuff there. We'd interviewed the lawyer that was representing the plaintiff suing the city. And then it kind of just dropped off until the city council thing. So I contacted the lawyer. I reached out to the city attorneys and the police chief and didn't get much back until after I'd basically written the whole story and rated Pacer, which is like federal court cases and all their court documents. That was an expensive month. Pacer charges 10 cents per page. There was a lot of pages. But the attorney actually was able to give us some of his discovery items as well, which is when they submit their evidence and testimony. And we saw from that testimony that the police chief had in his notes on this police officer written that he had done multiple terminable offenses, but kept him on the force for months. And then a couple months after that, he did it again to someone else. And that's now another suit that's going in. But the way we kept all these kind of threads, you've got a few issues to go over. One is Alabama typically has what's called liability insurance for police officers. Phoenix City does not have that. Then you've got the officer's record of offenses, which were well documented over the course of his 4 years with the department. And then on the flip side, we also had him getting a service commendation the same year. So keeping all that together and making it narratively flow without feeling like you're reading a book. Subheadings are probably the best way to do it, especially with feature pieces. Like you'll see it. I read a lot of newspapers. Honestly, it's weird that I work in broadcast because I don't watch a lot of broadcast news. I read a lot of people's scripts because I like seeing how that works on the technical side, but I don't watch TV. I don't have cable. So the way that I structure things is kind of, you want to set it up with a big story as if each section is its own small chapter, and structure that so that the flow, your first set of paragraphs is always going to be just like how that story is overall. And then each of those is kind of like what informs the subheadings for how you break down each portion into its own story, but still keep it connected so that when you get to the first paragraph and the last paragraph, it's all kind of bookended together. I can send that to you guys if you want, so you can read through how I put it together. But we have like dash cam footage, photos from the scene, because police have to document the guy's injuries, and his face is just covered in blood by their own documentation. And then we've got quotes from the city attorney. I transcribed part of the city council meeting when they were going over the settlement, and all those elements. Visual stuff helps break up the story too, so it doesn't feel as long. So I would definitely say, if you can get video or photos, especially, or interview someone, Zoom is a great tool right now. When you can meet with people in person, it makes people more willing to go on camera for even just a couple minutes.
Okay, awesome.
Lawyers tend to be long-winded though, so just be prepared for that.
Awesome.
The way we keep those stories easy to read and get through, even if they're longer, is definitely with how you break up the story with like headings. So we have our headline, which is like really big, and then slightly smaller. I had sub headlines that I used to break up the sections and format it so it didn't feel like it was quite so long.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That helps a lot, because that's something that I really struggle with, is just having this huge influx of information. And then like, I just want, like you said, like the whole like bite-sized paragraphs. That's something that like I need to focus on, because I like words, and it's really easy to get wordy, especially in a time where people are not ready to, they don't want wordy. They want quick and easy, convenient. So thank you so much. That covers a great amount of what I needed to hear.
Something to keep in mind too is there's a few more things to unpack in what Sam just said, which is the organization of that material into an overview section at the top, which, let's imagine someone's reading this story on their phone, and they scroll through those first 3 to 4 or 5 paragraphs, and they get the overall essence of the story at the top. And maybe perhaps right when their attention is beginning to flag, boom, there's another sub headline, which is bigger than the text, and it's bolder, and it has an interesting twist to the story. And they're like, oh, and it's like that extra little tease to propel them forward through the next 3 or 4 paragraphs. And maybe then as attention starts to flag a little bit, boom, there's another sub headline with another twist in the story. So it is a organizational tool. It keeps in mind that most of the consumption is on the phone, and it takes into account the natural ebb and flow. My interest is high and it's starting to wane. Boom, my interest is up again, and it's starting to wane, and boom, my interest is up again. So you keep kind of like pulling people through the story with those subheadlines, or a piece of video in the story, or an image in the story, to keep them, interested in, working their way through something which, has a lot of great info. But if it's one long paragraph in one long chunk of text with nothing breaking it up, you just physically get tired of doing this. Like, when is this thing gonna end, man?
Another thing to keep in mind too is that like we had a pretty long feature style story on it, but there were still like 4 or 5 other things we could have thrown in there and done justice to, but that would have made it just extremely long. Like, example, the same lawyer is now suing the city again, but also now including the police chief and the same officer for that second case. And so because court cases of this type are very complicated, it's not even going to see a courtroom until December of this year. So there are a lot of elements that are going to be in that second case that tie back to the first one that are just not going to get covered right now.
Got it.
Ryan, you had another question?
Yeah, sorry that I'm hounding you today, Sam. I apologize.
You're good.
But I'm just curious. I personally really enjoy investigative reporting, and I was curious how you kind of got into it to start, because it's not really something I've ever seen anyone major in or get a starting job in. So How did you get your foot in the door to start investigative reporting?
I got the start with it by making a mistake when I was first working in my school paper. I had been mostly doing like entertainment style book reviews, things like that, I was an English major, so I didn't do communications. When I first got to my school paper at CSU, I was doing it mostly for like grocery money. I didn't care about news, didn't care about journalism, just needed something to help pay for food. We had a bunch of staff graduate, and so nobody was there to cover a new director of our music school coming in. And there were a lot of rumors that part of it was very dramatic. And so my editor at the time had assigned me to figure out what was going on and write about it. But there were a number of strategic, what I'll call journalistic errors being made. One being that there was not enough time to edit it and fact check everything. The people I interviewed were seniors, but as is the case on campuses, gossip is a big problem. So a lot of the information that I had in the initial draft that should have been removed or checked again was not checked by my editors. I was brand new reporter, so I had no experience doing it, and it ended up blowing up in my face. I had not met my advisor at that point. I had not met half the people that ended up being really, really angry with the story because it was factually inaccurate. And that whole editing process and kind of the lack of standards, I guess is the best way to put it, very much changed my view very quickly from this is just a way to get some grocery money. And that really changed kind of my whole approach to writing. They switched me immediately from that to the campus life beat, which included like CSU policy administration, SGA, and like dorm housing stuff. So pretty soon after I got into that, student government took on the school administration for printing fees because they were limiting how much paper you could use. And so rather than just be like, CSU says this, the students want more paper, I actually went and interviewed a whole bunch of people who were making these decisions, asking them how they got to their conclusion. Turned out their conclusion was completely wrong. They said this is a green initiative for environmentalism, but the budget showed that they're actually going to end up using more paper anyway. So what was the point? They just wanted to charge students more money for less paper and then take that and put it towards another project. So we covered that and they stopped and put the paper back to where it was going to be. And then a few months later, they tried to get live cougars on campus for a mascot. And that was a disaster where there was a student government meeting that had 2,000 students come in to scream at an administrator over it. And it's just covering things like that that are obviously of human interest because it's like, this is our campus, what are you doing to us? And then applying it in a way that's not just people are angry, here's why. That's kind of what got me on that path. And then I just sort of lucked in. Actually, my biggest investigative story here was one that was mentioned in the bio on the sexual harassment case with Title IX. A WRBL reporter actually covered it for a total of 30 seconds as spring break hit in 2016. They stood up in front of the school, filmed here's this harassment case, we'll bring you more. And then there was never anything more. I got back from spring break the next week and spent the next 2 months learning everything I could about Title IX, interviewing the investigators, interviewing the professors involved, the department heads, the school administrators who were handling the case. I got the entire testimony report and all the witness statements. Granted, they were redacted, but that was what really kind of shows process, I guess. I don't know if that quite answers your question, but it's a combination of experience, action, and luck. Really, you'll never be able to force your way into a good story.
Thank you, Sam. Also, lucky you that you got paid to work at your student newspaper.
Yeah, the school
heard of
paper
that.
at CSU is one of the only ones in the country that pays its reporters.
I'm not happy about it, but I understand.
Sorry.
So maybe while you all think of some other questions, Sam, I'd like to return maybe to some mechanical basics, if you don't mind going
Sure.
over. Let's talk with, we've set a word target of 500 words for their stories that they're going to be writing. So talk a little bit about why word count matters for stories that you publish. Why, let's start with that, and how different lengths of stories will perform against the algorithms and the metrics online, and why we shoot for certain word counts at certain times for certain kinds of stories.
Yeah, so for your general reporting, so like let's say you're on court coverage and you're covering a bunch of cases of people coming to their first hearings in court or something, that story needs to be a minimum of like 250 words. That's what gives you enough room to get into the little bit of detail you get from the court case, because a lot of it doesn't come out until they get into the actual trial. Hearings are really good though for kind of testing your writing skills early and how you structure and how you entice readers. The 250 word count there is from a number of factors, but the biggest one is that Google will not put your article will not appear in Google search results before page 5 of results. At that point, nobody's going to click that far in to look for it unless you have a minimum of 85 to 125 words in your article, not counting headline, byline, or subheads. So the story itself and the word count really shouldn't even include in that 85 to 125, shouldn't even include your lead paragraph. Lead paragraph is great for meta details, like how Google's going to summarize your stuff, but it's not going to count that for the words it wants to actually make you pull up in the first like 1 or 2 pages of results. So that's part of why we go for a 250 word count on a basics story, like whether it's just here's this community news for the day or a crime story or all of that. If you're doing a feature, which is what we're aiming this internship to in terms of developmental writing, 500 to 550 words is a really good sweet spot for having those details, having that taste of in-depth reporting without being too long and losing people's interest. But you'll also see if you start reading like big papers and other big online publications, their stories can average sometimes 750 words or longer. The New York Times, I think, one of the longest ones I read there, or from like the Boston Globe, those they can get up to 1,000, 1,200, or 1,200 words. It really depends on the topic, how they break it up, and what the long-term strategy is for that story. One of my favorite examples is Spotlight, the movie and the stories that was based off of. Those features each averaged about 1,300 words, and they published 750 to 850 of them over the course of 2 years. That's a team. None of those stories are written.
Sorry.
Yeah, it's a lot. Honestly, it's one of the only like newspaper stories that I don't have a subscription to, that I own every story from it, because I straight up found them wherever I could in archives and copy and pasted them to save it for writing examples. I have like a folder on my computer full of people that I want to emulate my writing with, and so I keep rereading them and apply their strategies to new things, which is something I would just recommend you do. Any reporters or producers or whoever you respect, take their work in and absorb it, and then apply their lessons to how you work. Grace?
So you were talking about emulating other people's like writing. What are some reporters that you look up to that you would recommend us to kind of observe for?
Okay, my list. Hold on.
You're
I'm
good.
not kidding. I actually have it pulled up.
Go ahead.
Let's see. From the Globe, specifically that team, you've got Sasha Pfeiffer, who works at NPR now, Mike Rezendes, who's the main feature writer for that whole thing. He's now the investigations global lead for the Associated Press. Carl Bernstein from the Watergate stuff, he's still pretty active and an excellent writer. I actually like him over Woodward. Woodward's more famous, but Bernstein's more fair.
Mm-hmm.
I would say, hold on, I have like a bunch of sticky notes on my desktop. Let me pull it up. I'm sorry, guys.
You're good. That's totally fine.
I'm a big nerd, so I have like a lot of
Same.
notes on a bunch of things. And now I can't find the note, which is great.
Would you mind just writing a follow-up email with top
Yes.
5 with links and then send them to everybody? Sam?
Yes.
Perfect.
Publications though that I would definitely read, even if they cost a little bit, I would definitely read the Times, because they're like the gold standard of in-depth reporting. Granted, they do have a slight lean towards the left, but they're still pretty center left. ProPublica is my dream publication to work for. Honestly, they're absolutely objective. They do incredibly nuanced, in-depth reporting on a grand scale of investigative, going from state to national, and then applying that to places where you can take it and run local too. They have a local reporting network that does a lot of really great work, and they're expanding. They just opened up 2 new bureaus across the country, so they've got 4 now. They're in Chicago, New York, now Atlanta, and Albuquerque, New Mexico as well, so they can cover more. And then that's in addition to their partnerships with local newsrooms.
Awesome.
So if I had to pick one publication that's free with no paywall to go to, that's probably my one. If you want to do feature writing and investigative reporting, read ProPublica. They're former Wall Street Journal writers that thought the Wall Street Journal was getting too right wing, and so they went center and just did their own thing. And
Awesome.
they're very successful. They're one of the few publications that is a nonprofit model that's very successful.
Awesome. Sounds great. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Let's do a little bit of glossary here, Sam, if you don't mind.
Sure.
This may sound obvious, but people will be watching this video later and maybe need it for refreshment. So what are the 3 to 4 elements of a web story? What is a headline?
in people terms or in newsletter terms?
Yeah, well, but whatever you think is appropriate for someone who's aspiring to do that.
Headline is your appetizer. Your lead paragraph is definitely going to be like your, I don't want to call it an aperitif, but basically what you have as like the palate cleanser that gets you more excited for your meal between the appetizer and your food. So I guess a salad maybe. Body copy is obviously going to be the meat of the story. That's the important stuff. And then your conclusion, I don't really call them conclusions anymore. The end of the story, because it could be anything from a quote that sums it up to just like a line teasing to more or something. But you've got basically headline, lead paragraph, body copy, and then your kind of final 2 or 3 sentences that sums everything together and ties it up in a bow. But for web stories, especially, you need a feature image. That's honestly one of the most important things to have as a feature image, because if your story doesn't have a look to it or something that ties people in by having people read with their eyes. That sounds really, really dumb and obvious, but if you have a boring picture, they're not going to click your story. Headlines are great. Pictures are more important, especially in social media.
So we've asked the participants when they write their articles to get 5 or 6, really, get 6 photographs to go with their article. And I'll explain why, and then if you don't mind jumping in and adding to it. At many operations, slideshows work in 2 ways for a news operation. Slideshows are a way to dramatically increase your page views. If someone clicks on your story, that's 1 page view. If you have 6 pictures with your story and they read your story and they look at all 6 pictures, that's 7 page views. Each time they slide through an image, there's another page view. So it's the article plus the 6 photos, that's 7 page views instead of 1 page view. That is dramatic in terms of numbers, right? Also, many organizations, when you're doing the slider for the photos, after the 5th photo, an ad pops up. So there's a monetary issue at stake here too. If you have 6 photos, the slider will be telling you there's another photo to look at. So you slide through 5 photos, you see the ad, you get an ad impression for the sales side of the house, and then you slide to the next photo, and you've not only gotten 7 page views, you've also gotten an ad impression. So you've got 2 ad impressions instead of 1, and you've got 7 page views instead of 1 page view. So there's a way to dramatically increase your page views by doing engaging images. Plus, visuals matter. You can keep people engaged in your story if you have strong visuals. They won't even click if you don't have a good featured image, but having other images to let them see what you're describing in your text is incredibly important. Sam, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, actually, too, what's interesting with the way that pictures are used now is sometimes you'll have stories that have very little what we'll call body copy, but they'll have story elements like as captions on the photos themselves. So you miss part of the story if you don't hit the photos, which encourages you to interact with them. In addition to that, the more page, it's kind of the one problem I have with how social media and Google Analytics algorithms work right now is that stories that are already doing well will continue to do well. So like if you have a story that you go from 1 page view and then you've got 6 photos, you add 6 more page views per opening of that article, then that dramatically increases the likelihood that people will continue to open it, which is good and bad. It's problematic because it means they won't click new content unless it directly ties in, which is why hyperlinking in your copy is sometimes pretty important. Especially with a story that you've done multiple pieces on. I absolutely recommend finding ways to do outbound and internal links so that you can attach, like if I'm writing a story on, let's say, coronavirus vaccines, if I put an outbound link to the like COVID dashboard for Georgia while I'm citing information from that, they'll click it to make sure that I'm not, BSing them, but they'll come back to my story because I didn't BS them. And so it builds credibility, but also that outbound link on a technical side increases your page view percentage increase and lowers your bounce rate, which is weird because bounce rates are like how quickly people leave your page. So if they're switching back and forth, it feels like it would be higher, but it's actually lower because they're staying there, which is a little bit different with mobile. This is very, very technical, so I'm sorry. But basically there are a lot of elements you have to keep in mind when you're producing a web story that you wouldn't normally do for broadcast by itself because of the engagement factors. And that also can adjust based on like target demographics. So if you're aiming for like a more college aged audience, you're going to want more visual elements, smaller sections of text between them. If you are aiming for like the 45 to 50 audience, you're going to want bigger chunks of text between videos and photos, or even no photos or no videos. You want one or the other, and you don't want to use both depending on what type of story it is. So all of that all of it kind of factors in weird ways. And unfortunately, Facebook being the biggest kind of what I'll call an offender, they change how their algorithm works every 3 months, and they don't tell you what changes until a month after, which is 2 months away from the next change. So it's like you're always playing catch up to an extent.
And for, I want to point something out here, maybe at the risk of using a poor metaphor, you could be very good at something, and perhaps you just want to be very good at something and you don't care if anybody ever sees it. You might be the fastest runner in the world, and you might go out every day and run, and you might time yourself, and you've broken 5 or 6 world records, but you're not a member of a team. You don't compete in the Olympics. And so you're the fastest person in the world, but no one else in the world knows you're the fastest person in the world, and history won't document that. If you instead want to show you're the fastest person in the world and share that gift with other people, then you go to get on an Olympic team and you win a bunch of gold medals and you go down in history. In essence, you know that there's a system to get the story of your running out there. So what we're talking here about, when we talk about images, we talk about word count, we talk about headlines, all these skills, what they are mechanisms for getting your story in front of more readers. So if you would like to write a story and read it for yourself and it's good, then that's a worthy enterprise in itself. But if you want other people to enjoy your story, if you want other people to hear the story or about those people you're writing about, then if you learn how to work the system, then your story will get in front of more eyeballs. So there's a mix there between the art and the craft of creating something and understanding that where I publish it, there are certain requirements which will enable my story to reach a wider audience. And if you're conscious of that while you create and publish your story, then your story gets in front of more eyeballs. Does that make sense to everybody the way I'm describing that? And there's also some stuff that goes on under the hood that I want to talk a little bit about. Sam, if you wouldn't mind covering keywords and metadata, explain what they are and how we use them.
Keywords, we actually, in our WordPress platform, their meta keywords are like search terms that your audience won't see, but that affect where it'll pop up in search results. Our strategy for SEO right now, search engine optimization, is to make sure that those meta keywords appear at least 2 or 3 times within your story, as well as at least once in the headline, using what I call a key phrase rather than just a keyword. We aim to have between 5 to 7 keywords for every story that we produce on web, and part of that is for variety, and also so that it allows for kind of what I call tangential relationships between stories. So like obviously, if you're covering multiple homicides, the word homicide is going to be a keyword because it'll not only increase traffic to the one story, but to all the other related stories, which are also about homicides. We do a lot of crime coverage in broadcast news. Generally, all news does now because it's the quickest way to get more people to see your other news, because crime is such a popular topic to look at. Really, our top 3 things that you'll see people click on generally are crime, animals, and like the weather. Those are like the 3 big ones. Obviously, during politics seasons, those are big because people want to see all the dirty stuff that their politicians are doing or saying or campaigning on. But generally speaking, crime coverage, pets, and like cute animal stories and like feel-good health stories, you'll see a lot of traffic on. So the keywords there usually relate as well as come in the story. So like if I'm writing a story on like a cancer survivor, as an example, cancer is definitely going to be in that headline. Cancer is also going to be at least in 4 or 5 different paragraphs, if not sentences per paragraph, depending on how the story is. And then in your keywords, you'll see that, but you'll also see things that tie it back to your specific outlet. So we will also use WRBL in the keywords because while it won't appear in the story necessarily, it's on our website, which means it'll show up there when you type in a search term with our website stuff. And so all of that ties together in a kind of it's chaotic, if that makes sense. there's never any secret sauce that guarantees people will click on something, but there are certain things you can tweak to make it more of a guarantee. And that constantly shifts, but there's always a few things, like for our coronavirus updates that we do every day. We cover 2 states. We cover Alabama and Georgia because of our DMA. We have what we refer to as secret sauce meta keywords for all of our coronavirus updates for when we do the numbers themselves and our vaccine updates. And then in addition to that, we have like a special branding package that we built for our web pages that have coronavirus content on them. And all of that ties together for improving search results because they backdate by going and linking to the previous version from like the day before, as well as the section overall on our website. And then on top of that, even our images have keywords and metadata so that it continues tying it together.
And Sam, it's important that when someone is publishing a story that they remember to click open those things under the hood and fill in that metadata and those keywords. Yes. Because it may be a beautiful photo that you spent a lot of time capturing and editing but if Google can't search it and find it, no one's ever going to see it, right?
Right.
If you don't mind, Sam, I'd like to call on Tom briefly. Tom, give us your 30-second bio so everybody knows who you are and what you do here, and then I want to ask you a question as well.
Sure. So my biography reads a lot like Sam's. In fact, we got started on the same college paper. I think I was there a year before he was, and handed off some of my responsibilities to him when I left. In print for a long time, freelance guy, magazine editor, and sort of fell into television, this time following Sam. So reversing that. And it's been a fantastic career move. I love it over here. Of course, right now I'm the evening news producer. I do that, but I'm also, like Gene, you said earlier, looking at this digital role and pretty excited about it. So, but you had a question for me, Gene?
Yeah, I think that a lot of people on this call are eyeing careers in television and perhaps wanting to be MMJs or reporters or anchors. And so, Sam came in-house here and took a path that was text article-based, reporter-based, investigative journalism-based, and parlayed that into some success for our digital side. You came in and then learned how to do TV producing and script writing, and then you're one of our writing coaches in the newsroom for both text and for script. And so I think your insights on the difference between text and script and the commonalities, compare, contrast, and what your experience has been in terms of learning how to navigate both of those worlds, because everybody in our operation and most everybody in media now has to be able to write both AP style text and script. So if you wouldn't mind sharing something you might be useful for these folks, I'd appreciate it.
Sure. Well, the thing that is most important in both contexts, no matter what, is to get it right. That is always primary. If you get it right, that's 90% of the thing. The other stuff is style, and style is where we start to see a big difference. Sam talked about this earlier on for digital writing, and I love the quote that he had. You're clear, they understand you, this sort of thing, and certainly all of that is true. With broadcast, it's making the switch to conversational language. Obviously, we're writing in the present, and we're being keenly aware of the delivery of the human voice, the idea that one person is sitting here talking to another person at the dinner table over a cup of coffee kind of thing. And that's typically how you approach those moments, whereas writing for web is a little let's see, it's more formal, right? And so one of the things I think you do in all writing is, and this is, I'm sure you've all heard this before, when you write it, read it out loud, see how it sounds. But when you're writing for prose to be read, whether it's on a screen or in print, you can give yourself more complex sentences. You can typically dive a little deeper with the diction, those sorts of things. But when you're writing for television, you are looking for short, almost staccato sentences most of the time that keep attention, and you have to be keenly aware of moving the narrative forward with each progressive sentence. you have very limited space. And so you've really got to dig in and figure out how to get as much information as possible, as clearly as possible, as conversationally as possible, in as short a space as possible. And you juggle all these things at the same time, and you make judgment calls on each of them. And through some practice, you can get pretty good at doing that. And so, you know, that's the other thing that I think is general to both print, digital, TV, whatever. There are two ways to get better at writing. It's to practice the thing and then to read a lot. You know, Gene, your suggested reading material is really great. I'm so glad, Sam, that you shared your some publications and some writers that you're paying attention to, because that's the other advice that I've given everybody that I've ever taught writing to in any context. It's, yeah, keep practicing and go read until you can't read anymore. Those are the best things you can do. So I hope all of you, you know, take that suggested reading to heart and go out and find, you know, when you're reading these journalists that Sam sent you to, start there and then start branching out and find other journalists who you go, hey, this person's work reminds me of so-and-so's work that Sam recommended. How are they similar? How are they different? How are they doing things differently? What are they doing that's the same and why? And just really start to interrogate text wherever you find it. And when I say text, I mean both digital and TV scripts. I mean, really think about why it's constructed the way it is and how the different elements that compose it are working in tandem to produce a coherent product. So that would be
That's great.
So yeah, a little bit of homework.
Anybody have any questions for Tom about writing for script? Okay. Tom, as a producer, you write for someone else to present. So some of the people on this call may find themselves trying to break into television as a line producer. So if you wouldn't mind, talk a little bit about the idea of writing for someone else to present it. There are some diplomatic things there. There's some negotiation that goes on between you and anchors at times. There's understanding what certain people are good at and or comfortable doing. So talk a little bit about that for a second, if you don't mind.
Yeah, so I'm very lucky in that really this entire time in television, I've written for every anchor in the building now, but 95% of my writing has been for two anchors, and they're both really great. They've been in the business for years and years, Teresa Whitaker and Phil Scoggins, and really in a lot of ways, they have been instrumental in teaching me how to write for broadcast. So I've had the good fortune of writing for the people who taught me how to write for broadcast. Of course, they have different voices, and you do need to be mindful of that and switch back and forth, and be mindful again of what different anchors are comfortable with and the nature of their delivery. And of course, I have a lot of practice at doing that. I think that the first thing to do if you're coming in as a new producer into a position and you're going to write for this anchor or whoever, go talk to them, ask them. It would be completely appropriate to say, hey, I'm new here. Can we pull up yesterday's rundown and go through it and talk to me about all of those things that you like to see in a script, all of those things that you prefer. Tell me what you like and why you do things the way you do, so that I can figure out how to do that on my end. And I think that's, for me, that's been the biggest thing. It's being open and collaborative. This is a team sport. Especially when you're putting something on television. And so play as a team. And of course, once you get it on air as a producer, you spend time in the booth, you're watching all the graphics, you're watching all the video, pay attention to voice, pay attention to timing, pay attention to the inflection that your anchor is using. And in doing that, you will start to pick up on their idiom and the way they do things and write to that. I would also recommend, if you're writing a script, and you're not sure about it, there's that voice, you go, something's off here. I don't know exactly what it is. Maybe hey, anchor, let's take a look at this. You know, if you're writing something and you know you want to do something a little out of the ordinary for your anchor, but you find it's appropriate to the story, you know, whatever, say, hey, let's look at this. This is what I have envisioned. How do you read this? Does this work on your end too? You know, I have a delivery in mind for this new thing we're going to try. How would you deliver it? Does this make sense to you? Is there a better way to do this based on your style and delivery? The biggest thing is it's communication. You know, just as we are communicating stories to our viewing public, we have to communicate with each other to get that on TV, make it look good, make it sound good, and again, and get the information right. The biggest thing is that communication and learning the people you're working with.
Great, thanks, Tom. And so, Sam, I would, hey, we're nearing the end of our time here. We're at it, but I want to ask you to wrap up, if you don't mind, with 2 items. Number one, what are the top 3 mistakes you see new producers, reporters, MMJs, associate producers make when approaching web copy that you think that folks on this call might be aware of and work on a little bit before they hit the newsroom their first day on the job? What's the 3 things that they might do some prep work on to avoid, you know, just being unaware of something or stumbling? Top three things that they can prep their way out of a mistake before they even hit the room.
Verb tense agreement, fact checking, and visual elements, honestly. A lot of people tend to get a lot of video and then there's nothing usable for like a thumbnail or a feature image. Grammar specifically for verb tense agreement is going to make sure that you're not saying is and was in the same narration, being like your actual writing. Quotes are fine because it's not your words. Your words need to match up. And sorry, I lost the last one.
Sorry.
Fact checking. Yeah. Fact checking. Don't trust your sources, but don't trust your sources. Don't take them at face value. Always double check what they say or triple check. If someone says something and the internal nagger in your head says, no, that's definitely wrong, check it. It might be right, but trust your instinct for sure, because people always have an agenda and you cannot take them at their word directly. Those are the 3. Those are the ones that are going to trip you up the most.
Great.